Hello guys, David Vos here. Boy, oh boy, it's a beautiful day here. It was warm. The nights are cold, but it's still hanging on. We still haven't had any snow. And it's still burning in Los Angeles. Now I want to talk to you guys about Los Angeles today and all the fires that's burning. I'm thinking back how we forget. It's been years. I remember the fires in Australia, Canada. Remember the fire in Paradise, California. Remember the fires at Santa Barbara and the wildfires for several years we've had in California. The Hawaii fire. Remember the fire in Paradise? Now, just to point this out briefly, some of these fires are interesting, almost like little coded positions. For instance, if you're going to have a fire burn down in California that wipes out one city, just burns the whole city down, the houses are burned and melted to the ground, and all the trees around the houses are still standing. The forest is fine around this town. It's just this one town, just the houses and the businesses, and everything's gone, leveled. Every house, every store, it's gone. Just the city and the people, not the trees. Would it be a coincidence or strange to you if that town was called Paradise? Like if they were trying to signal to you that they want to get rid of Paradise. Or they're mad that you called the town Paradise because it's kind of up in the mountains and they think, well, you should be down here in the valley with all the other scum. Why are you building up there in the mountains in an area where there are pine trees in the hills, in the mountains there in California, the foothills of the Sierras? But they burned it down. It's called Paradise. And then the fires that are going on right now, I was thinking, well, wait a minute. Somebody was saying, hey, if it's Hollywood that's burning down, and I saw several very prominent, famous people saying that their house burned down. There was a couple of people on Joe Rogan. I think it was Mel Gibson and somebody else that was famous that had gone on his show, said their house had burned down. So the fires are started off somewhere near Hollywood. Yeah, I don't know exactly where, but it's somewhere in the Hollywood area of California, Los Angeles. And it started burning towards the Palisades and up the coast, which is where all these Palisades in different places where these movie stars have homes. Now, we were saying when it was going on in Hawaii that it was these poor native peoples that were being burned out. They wanted their land. Well, nobody has mentioned the fact that the people that are being burned out in Los Angeles right now are elite, very rich people, because you cannot own a home in the Palisades unless you're rich. You pretty much cannot own a home in California unless you're pretty wealthy. You have to be a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist, or something. Silicon Valley. Or you could rent something with several different families living in one house. That's the only way you're going to live in a house. There's two kinds of people that live in California. There's the rich, the elite, and the CEOs and the managers that make pretty good money. So the rich. And then everyone else, everyone else is homeless, on welfare, or in HUD housing or something. Because you cannot just on regular wages afford to live there and rent or buy a house. So it's interesting that where the fires are burning right now, it's probably burning rich homes. But not just any rich homes. Hollywood. Movie makers, movie producers, maybe one of the biggest movie producers in the world, Mel Gibson. And it's almost as if they're trying to say, yeah, it's affecting us too, because there was a lot of pushback on that fire in Hawaii because they were saying that they were just taking out the natives there. So now they're showing pictures, and people are going on Joe Rogan saying, yeah, I'm rich and I lost my house. Yay, yay. It's almost like it's propaganda. But maybe I am just a conspiracy nut. But I want to read you something here, starting with the fires in Australia. Remember, these fires have been going on for a while, starting in Australia and Canada and different places. So I thought, well, you know, we know about the fires in the 19th century. We've been talking about the Chicago fire and so forth. But I thought, well, let's go back to the beginning, or a long time ago anyway, and let's start like BC and see just how these fires were used politically from the beginning. So I looked up in the Wikipedia, Antiquity to the Middle Ages, 587 BC, the destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. 330 BC, Persepolis destroyed by fire after its capture by Alexander the Great. 146 BC, Carthage was systematically burned down over 17 days by the Romans at the end of the Third Punic War. 64, Great Fire of Rome, Italy. Near 79, Lyon burned to ashes. 406, a great fire burned down much of Constantinople. 532, the Nika riots resulted in the destruction of much of Constantinople by fire. 798, London nearly destroyed. 847, Borgo, Italy. The area around St. Peter's Basilica in Rome was devastated by fire. 1041, fire destroys most of the old city of Bremen, Germany, including the cathedral.
Losing time, I'm fading fast. I just wanna make it last. Try to let go of the past. I close my eyes, embrace the blast. Sleepless nights and headaches stack. Restlessness to hell and back. What's my purpose? What do I grab? A slippery surface, a heart attack. And sometimes you just gotta believe there's something that'll give you relief. There's something that'll have what you need. What you need. We're broken, it's tragic. We're not all elastic, but maybe there's magic. Believe you could have it. And I know of sadness, the anxious and panic, the infinite vastness of all that is blackness.
The 19th century. Detroit, Copenhagen, and burned down the Church of Our Lady. The Great Fire of Podil in Kiev, Russia. Yeah, Kiev is part of Russia, the Russian Empire. The Fire of Moscow, 1812, started by Napoleon. Buffalo, New York. York, Upper Canada. Burning of Washington in 1814. Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Great Fire of Tirschenreuth in Tirschenreuth, Bavaria. St. John's, Newfoundland. In the 1820s, we've got Palms, Puerto Rico. Paramaribo, Suriname. Fayetteville. Miriamaki Fire, Great Fire of Turku, Finland. Augusta, Georgia. 1830s, Fayetteville, North Carolina. New York City, the second. Charleston, South Carolina. 1840, the Great Fire of Hamburg. 1845, the Great New York City Fire. 1845, Great Fire of Pittsburgh. We've got Puerto Rico again. St. John's, Newfoundland again. Bucharest, Medina, Ohio. Albany, New York. St. Louis. First Great Fire of Toronto. First one, there's coming more. Krakow Fire in Poland. San Francisco Fire, 1851, destroyed 2,000 buildings. Finland, Montreal, Newcastle, and Gateshead, England. Large fire in Auckland, New Zealand. And the 1858 Christiana fire severely damaged the city. 1860s, we've got Troy, New York. Valparaiso, San Francisco fire of 1863. Great fire of Brisbane. The American Civil War involved several major city fires. Charleston, South Carolina. Atlanta, Georgia. William Tecumseh Sherman, Columbia, South Carolina. Richmond, Virginia. The Great Portland Fire. The Great Fire of Quebec City. Faubourg, Auerbach, Bavaria. The Great Fire of Whitstable of 1869. Kent, England. 1870s, Medina, Ohio. Paris Commune in May destroyed the Royal Palace of Tuileries, the Louvre Library, the Hotel de Ville, the Gare de Lyon. 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed downtown on October 8th, died out the following night, about 250 dead. The Peshtigo Fire, 1871, Michigan. The Great Michigan Fire. Great Boston Fire. Chicago Fire of 1874. Paris, Texas. St. John, New Brunswick. Great Fire of Hong Kong. Deadwood, South Dakota, 1880s. I mean, just keeps going and on and on and on and all these. There's Vancouver, Seattle, the Great Spokane Fire, Washington, Ellensburg Fire, Great Bakersfield Fire, Massachusetts, Clarksville, Maine, South Dakota, Iowa, Vermont, Norway, Massachusetts, Gifford, Illinois, Conrad, Iowa. What does Paris, Texas keep burning down for? Windsor, Nova Scotia, Puerto Rico again, Ottawa Fire. I mean, this is just, there's a lot of fires. All right. Now look at this. The World Fairs were used as an excuse to demolish America's ancient architectural heritage. Does that look like something that you just throw up in a weekend with some plaster Paris? No. That looks like beautiful architecture, the likes of which could not have been any better in ancient Athens or in ancient Egypt or something, or Rome. Person says the above picture is called the Palace of Fine Arts, constructed in 1915 for the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. If the official history is to be believed, then why does this period painting from the early 1900s show the structure already heavily weathered as it is covered in moss and vines? Moss and vines. Yeah, there are vines and moss growing up it. Does that, of course it's a painting, but does that look like some kind of fake plaster of Paris thing? If the building was built when they said it was, then it should have been brand new. Instead, it looks ancient. There were 9 of these domes constructed along with a 500-foot tall marble tower. Looks like it came straight out of Atlantis. Here is the picture. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, man, the statues and some guy with wings on a horse or something. Anyway, here too, one can see much weathering of the stonework, as all the eagles and statues are blackened with centuries of dirt and grime. This was an ancient structure they fooled the public into believing was newly built for the Panama Pacific Exposition, and then they simply demolished it when the exposition was over. Now let's go back to that and look again. So if that building wasn't built when they say it was, and it had been there all along, then what kind of civilization was here in America long before we ever knew any civilization was here? And they had this technology. And why do they all have these steeples? And you notice here on these little domes, there's some kind of like antenna there. And look at all these little gargoyles and these little men standing. This is absolutely amazing. There's this square and compass or something on top of that person on the horse. There's two little angels, and I don't know, that looks weird. It looks like a square and compass. But that's some kind of a temple, because that's a water basin for baptism. And that globe in the middle with the horse that's got wings is some kind of a gargoyle. It's like a cherubim, basically. This is another temple-like figure. They built these temples all over the world. Why did they build these temples? And we have never heard about them. We don't even know that they're temples. Today, we've got a temple in Washington. We don't even know it's a temple. There's a big baptismal font, a male sex organ, and the female bin. This is exactly the same thing. If you look through the hole there, you see the male. And this is the female, bin. And there's the baptismal font and the cherubim and everything else. I think it's very odd. It says these buildings do not exist anymore because they were demolished. The excuse was always these buildings are only temporary, so they will be demolished when the fair is over. Only one of these magnificent domes still remains. It definitely was no temporary structure. It was built to last. Even by official history, it is over 100 years old now. If it was a temporary structure, it would have crumbled to the dust by now. Take a look at that. This is the one that is still standing. The little dome thing. Over 100 years now, this temporary structure. It says this is one of the domes they demolished. Okay, there's one of the domes that was destroyed. And mind you, the entire area, the sidewalks, you see the dome in the background, but on the left there's this Greek Athenian-like temple. This is just crazy. They just threw that up in a few days and burned it down. This is what San Francisco used to look like. The main tower was 500 feet tall and dwarfs Alcatraz in the background. All right, look at that. Okay. Look at this. I think that was that building we were just looking at. They loved domes, didn't they? That's the Golden Gate NRA Park Archives. What are these things out in the sea? Is that the Golden Gate? Or see, that's Alcatraz. But in the middle of the picture right there, it looks like oil rigs and stuff. It's, you know. But that's fantastic architecture. There's the West Gate. Obviously temporary. Look at the artwork. Beautiful. This is like ancient Egypt. Sun dials and gargoyles and angels. What is this evil lurking? Are you kidding me? This is, you don't just throw that up with paper mache and then burn it down. That is a piece of art. Nobody would build something like this and then tear it down. This is insane unless you're the conqueror and you're destroying another civilization to get it out of somebody's memory because you don't want their power to stand and you want to reset the world with your control. Another example of the World Fair being used as an excuse to demolish great architecture was the Chicago World Fair in 1893. Once again, these buildings look as if they came straight out of Atlantis. This so-called fair was the size of a small city. Let's look at the first one. Whoa! You know, I've seen this picture. I've shown you guys this picture before, but this is just fantastic. Again, that little waterway there, it's got the little bridge over it and stuff, and you see a statue, and you see the obelisk in the middle of that. That's a baptismal font. That is a male sex organ. That is a temple. And that would have been the capital then. All capitals had the same, they're all temples. They all have the male sex organ, the female sex organ, and the baptismal font. They usually have gargoyles, angels, what temples usually do, artwork and you know, I want to get back to these pictures, but I want to step in here and tell you guys something. And this is just blows my mind to smithereens when I think about it. In our world, there's all these things that supposedly are there, and we see them every day, or we see them a lot. People talk about it, but nobody seems to know anything about what it is or why it is. And nobody asks, how come we don't know? Or wouldn't there be a simple explanation? Or, you know, like, we just accept not only what they tell us, but if they tell us there is no explanation, we believe that. If they say, oh, well, we couldn't possibly figure out what these mean, these anomalies or this or that, and we're like, oh, okay, we couldn't possibly figure it out. And then they say, oh, those stars are exactly 458,000 light years 0.4, and there's a Earth with, you know, a habitable planet there with water on it. We're like, oh, well, they said so, you know. But this is something that's been bothering me for a long time. Everywhere in the United States, and I suspect just about everywhere, I know all the way down through Mexico and probably into South America, there are similar things. But I do know specifically all the way through Mexico, United States, and all the way up through Canada, we have one particular feature. It's called petroglyphs. And you'll be walking along and you see a rock, and on the rock is these strange petroglyphs. And what they purport to be is strange little figures and figurines and little animal pictures. Maybe some of them look like round suns or stars. So it could be astrological. And they have animals. Well, we know there are animals in the sky, right? And I have been saying for quite some time that I think that these petroglyphs are astrological signs, and there may be numbers and things mixed in, and it probably has some information in it. But I hadn't really, you know, decided what it all might mean. But I did think that these were temple areas, and they would bring their agriculture and their offerings, and there were certain times of the year based on their harvests and so forth, and all the native peoples all around would come, and they would come to these temples, and they would have like wagon loads or horse loads, or I know people say there weren't any horses in the ancient times, but that's another point that I want to talk about at some point. I don't think in this video, but I do believe there were horses in America before the white man got here, and, you know, with Columbus. But so all these native peoples would make pilgrimages to these locations, which were temples, where they would have altars, where they would make offerings to their priesthoods and to their deities and whatever. And we're not going to get into what their religions were or anything like that here in this video. But there certainly were these pilgrimages. Now, if you were going to be bringing people to certain locations at certain times of the year for offerings and for celebrations and that kind of thing, then, and especially if you're talking about the whole United States, Mexico, and this is a large area, and people don't know the way. Maybe they get lost. Think about it. Here in America, we have a freeway, highway system, and we have certain signs that mean stop, go, come, turns, slow down, whatever. We have certain things that make sense. This way to Atlanta, Georgia. This is San Francisco this way. New York this way. We have signs so that people can know where they're at. It controls the traffic. It's information. State Park on your left. I noticed, because the place I know more about these petroglyphs than any place else, I've seen them everywhere, but here in New Mexico, the whole corridor going up from Mexico all the way up through Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and up into Colorado, which actually leads into Colorado into the Purgatory River or Canyon. And it appears to be a corridor, like a highway. And all these petroglyphs are on both sides of this valley. Like anciently there was a road, a trail. And along the trails, petroglyphs. And they appear to be astrological signs and symbols, along with marks like numbers or whatever. It seems to me, because the ones up there in Purgatory Canyon in Colorado have Hebrew writing. A lot of them do have Hebrew writings, but you don't hear much about that. There are Hebrew writings here in New Mexico, and that one I was telling you about, the Mystery Mountain, which has an altar with the name, paleographic Hebrew name of Yahweh on the altar. And then at the bottom of the base of this mountain, there's this huge stone with the Ten Commandments written in paleographic Hebrew, dated to be 100 BC. So that appears to be a destination point, and you can follow the petroglyphs right up to that mountain. It looks like Mount Sinai, where there is an altar and there are these kilns, and it's obviously some kind of an offering place. And also they have places to store grain and wheat and nuts or whatever they bring. And there are various ones like this in New Mexico, and I know they're in Arizona and Colorado and up into Canada and all the way down to Mexico. What could possibly be along the road? What could these petroglyphs possibly be? Friends, they have to be, no question, signs along a thoroughfare getting to certain temples for holidays, for get-togethers. Now, this is how not only would they honor their deities and bring offerings, but they also would probably once or twice or 3 times a year, probably, as Judeans did. They would go up to the Lord 3 times in a year. They'd have these conventions. And they would probably have an area where they would all sit in, like an area where they could have an echo chamber, and they would speak and do dramas and theater and speeches and dance and have bonfires and have fun and drink and see the herbal medicine men and get healed and all the things that people need to come together as a family. And think about this. If these petroglyphs are very similar all the way down to South America and all the way up through Canada, that means that all these people were related and united by one major religion. All of them had the same basic culture and religion, where they all went from year to year up to the great temples and would bring their offerings and have their rejoicings and their congregations and their celebrations. I think it's absolutely amazing. And there's no other explanation possible. Why would grown men just decide to write the same kind of scribbles on a stone in America as they did in South America or as North America or Brazil or wherever? It isn't just a coincidence that these marks are on the rocks. They all had a one world religion. This was their highways. They were organized all the way from Mexico up into Canada and clear down into South America. They were all organized. And they had roads. And people kept the roads signs so that people knew where they were, how far it was to the next well along the road or whatever. I guarantee it. There's no other explanation. But anyway, we'll talk more about that, I think, in a coming video. But let's go back to what we're looking at here. So, all right, here's another one. We'll look at that. All right, here is Chicago. There's the great baptismal font. There's the great statue, like the Statue of Liberty. We've seen this before. And there's the Liberty Cap. Now, the Liberty Cap is very telling because that statue proves that it was given to these people from France. So whoever these people were that built this city, they had something to do with liberty and fraternity and justice and, you know, like the Statue of Liberty, because the Liberty Cap came from Mary Magdalene and the Tartarians. That was their symbol, these Tartarians. They had these Liberty Caps. So we know that the Tartarians, which went all the way to Japan, evidently, and remember, they went to Japan like years and years and years and years before Columbus came over. And so it seems like they came here at about the same time they went to Japan and Afghanistan and China. And when they conquered those areas and wiped out Iraq and then created those societies over there in the East, they obviously did it here long before 1776, my friends. And it seems to me that this was the capital here at Chicago, because we have the biggest downtown metro center in all the pictures that we see, this huge dome, and then we've got the male obelisk. In another picture, you'll see the baptismal font, the statues, and everything. It has to be a capital. And it would appear that the biggest capital would be the one that was the capital of all the other capitals. Some of the others, like we saw another one that was a capital in America, but that was a smaller place, and that was in, I think it was San Francisco. But this is bigger, and this is Chicago, and I think it was the capital for the whole United States. Okay, here's another one. Now look at that one. Look at that Capitol building in the back there. Just look at that. Look at these bulls right here. Look at the people walking around. Beautiful grass. It's mowed. United States flag. There's a big old gargoyle up on top there. Horses and chariots going across the river. There's a big lion laying in front of this. It's like the Sphinx, you know. There's horses. Beautiful. So this is what it looked like after the fire. Some big old buildings there, huh? Even then. But they're modern-like buildings. So this area, which was the ancient part of the city, was completely burned down. The modern part of the city remains. Looks like about a third or so of the city that was ancient. And the one, if that burned down, how did that one building not get burned down right in the middle, huh? Huh? But look. 2019 to 2020, Australian bushfires. Australia is no stranger to bushfires. However, the 2019 to 2020 season proved to be unprecedented in many ways. The first major bushfire began even before the official arrival of spring in June, and then new out-of-control fires sprung up. They just sprung up at the beginning of September in 2019. The fire situation worsened significantly at the beginning of November 2019 with increasing temperatures and a prolonged drought. In mid-January 2020, a wave of heavy rain finally brought relief in some areas hit by bushfires, but was nowhere near sufficient to extinguish the fires. It did provide a respite for firefighters in some areas who had seen only occasional breaks in the weather in the previous month. Hotter temperatures, drought, and high winds escalated the crisis again. Over the first weekend in February, In mid-February, an extremely heavy rainstorm allowed firefighters to contain all the fires in New South Wales. Although fires continued to burn in Victoria, all of the fires were either extinguished or contained by March 4th, 2020, 9 months after the first ones began to burn. 9 months. Was this the pain of pregnancy? What happened after the fires? And was the point of the fires to make a lot of smoke? And why? Was there something in the smoke? Look at here. It says who was affected and in what ways. Several firefighters called fireys in Australia were killed or injured. Many firefighters were volunteers and laid off fire management staff who were then asked to report back to work without pay. University of Sydney ecologist Chris Dickman, he was a dick man, estimates more than 1 billion animals, including 800,000 in New South Wales, perished from the bushfires. Now think about this, guys. 1 billion animals. 1 billion animals. Now, let me take a look at this other little thing. What was the impact on the communities? The bushfires burned more than 46 million acres, 72,000 square miles. Roughly the same area as the entire country of Syria. At least 3,500 homes and thousands of other buildings were lost. Well, they've already got about that many in Los Angeles now. And a lot of buildings were lost, and 34 people died. That's probably about where we're at here in California. In the thousands of fires between September 2019 and March 2020, the majority of deaths and destruction were in New South Wales, while the Northern Territory accounted for about approximately 1/3 of the burned area. At least 80% of the Blue Mountains World Heritage Area and 53% of the Gondwana World Heritage Rainforest in Queensland. So if you lose the rainforest, I'm told, you lose the world. Okay, so there was one little 9-month period in history where half or more than half of the rainforest in Australia was completely wiped out. But we're not talking about that anymore. 80% of the Blue Mountains and over 50% of the rainforest in Australia. I mean, you can't even fathom that when you hear about fires, a whole mountain burns. Nature does that from time to time. A couple of mountains and a ravine, maybe thousands of acres. But this is 1 billion animals gone. This is half the rainforest. And almost all of the mountains in Australia were burned. All right. Now, I guess you could talk about how much it cost them. $1.3 billion in insurance claims. And so who cares, right? Let's look at something else. Canada's record-breaking 2023 wildfires. And there were other huge wildfire events in Canada over the years, but I'm not sure if this was the worst year because I haven't been able to narrow that down, but this may have been the worst year, 2023. It released nearly 4 times more carbon than global aviation. Canada's 2023 wildfires made international headlines, causing billions of dollars in property damage, displacing thousands of people from their homes, spewing air pollution that traveled as far as Europe and China. A new analysis shows that the wildfires also had a massive effect on greenhouse gas emissions. Research from the WRI Global Forest Watch Initiative and the University of Maryland find that wildfires burn roughly 7.8 million hectares. Hectares are like a lot bigger than acres. In Canada in 2023, making up 45% of all land that burned in Canada that year and more than 6 times the annual average. The amount of tree cover loss produced roughly 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide, nearly 4 times the carbon emissions of the global aviation sector in 2022. It's a trend that's likely driven by the fact that in parts of Canada and other northern latitudes, land surface temperatures are warming at rates roughly double the global average. If this were true, we'd have to assume that maybe the Earth is turning on its axis and Canada, which was a snowy area, maybe melting and getting warmer there, but other places in the world, maybe it's getting colder. But I don't think that's it. I think that they're doing it on purpose. There was some statistics that they showed here about Canada, but the point here is that a lot of Canada burned down. Here in the Wikipedia, it says beginning in March 2023, with increased intensity starting in June, Canada was affected by a record-setting series of wildfires. All 13 provinces and territories were affected, with large fires in Alberta, British Columbia, and Northwest Territories, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Quebec. The 2023 wildfire season had the most area burned in Canada's recorded history. March 1st, 2023 to November 2023, all 13 provinces. There were 6,551 fires, 18.5 million hectares, which is 45.70 million acres, as of October 6th, 2023. There is a picture of all the fires all throughout Canada. As of October 6th, 6,500 fires, 72,000 square miles, 5% of the entire forest. So 5% of the entire forest of Canada, more than 6 times the long-term average. Smoke emitted from the wildfires caused air quality alerts and evacuations in Canada, the United States. In late June, the smoke crossed the Atlantic Ocean, reached Europe. Many of the largest fires were under control by July. Now think about all this smoke that's in the air. If it does nothing, let's say it's just smoke, there's nothing else but smoke, it literally would cause the earth to warm up because it makes a sort of a canopy, like a greenhouse effect. This could be why, if there was volcanic activity in the ancient times with the dinosaurs, and these volcanoes were going off all the time, would put ash in the air, and it would have made a greenhouse effect. Now, that would have made the trees bigger, and the big long-necked dinosaurs could eat from the tops of the trees. It's kind of a theory, but it's very possible, or even very likely, that that's the case. More smoke in the air, well, that's the principle that Bill Gates is trying to use when he's getting these airplanes and putting all these little particles in the air. It's supposed to be making it cooler because he's not using dust, he's using reflective, like little reflective things. Remember, we hear, oddly enough, we heard about the Sitchin novel about Nibiru and how they had some kind of hole in their atmosphere and they had to put little gold flakes in the air. I don't know. It seems like the little flakes makes it cooler, but the dark little ash makes it warmer. I know when St. Helens went off in the 80s or whatever it was, it didn't snow that year in Idaho. We didn't have any snow at all, and I'd never seen that in my life. And for years after that, it was much warmer. So smoke in the air makes it warmer, and of course, then they could say, oh, look, it's getting warmer. That must mean climate change is real, global warming. We've got to do something. The fires are burning everything, so we're going to have to crack down. People got to go in their houses. It's an epidemic. Nobody can smoke anymore. You can't drive cars because you might start a fire. Can't use a chainsaw. It might have a spark. There'll be all these new regulations. And people will not be allowed to drive because it's too dangerous. Let's stay in your little 15-minute cities. And you won't be able to use any water because we're running out of water. So you can't have more than a glass of water a day. You can't have chickens because they require water. Can't have cows and horses. Can't eat meat because that requires water. But we've got some genetically modified food over here in Ohio that we're growing that doesn't require water. So we're going to have to eat this fake food. Who knows? But if the animals are all dying, like millions of animals in these fires, then the habitat will start to, fade. I mean, animals produce breathing. Remember how they were saying that there's too many animals and we got to get rid of the cows because they breathe and fart too much? Well, maybe they just decided to go ahead and get rid of the deer, the elk, and the caribous. Lots of caribou and moose, bears, and it probably killed them by the millions. And rabbits and raccoons and whatever other little varmints are in the woods, wolves and cats, mice that are in the grass all died. Birds in the air, even if the birds flew away and survived, their little eggs wouldn't survive in the nests and they wouldn't be able to reproduce that year. So the reduction of carbon-based life has been like some percentage of the carbon life base on this earth has been diminished in the last few years. So if we had, I'm just throwing a weird number out, a trillion animals in the world, which I'm sure there were more than that. But I mean, think about all the insects and all the, the chain of life from shells to, remember we heard for years about the ocean is poison and all the fish are no good. They're all dying. We had Fukushima, supposed to have killed all the fish. So the fish are all dying. Now, isn't it interesting in the book of Revelation? It says, I saw when he opened the bottomless pit that smoke came out. And it talks about a third of the fish died and a third of the birds and a third of the trees. Well, in a very accurate way, this is actually happening. It has been happening. The Apostle Peter says that the earth will burn up. Are they going to make it worse? Is it going to get worse? Well, if this is man-made, they can do that if they want to. But the more you do it, the less animals there are, the less trees there are, then the trees won't be able to make air. Less air in the air, and so there won't be enough air. People with asthma will die first. And if there's not enough air, there won't be any ozone. We might end up literally be at the verge of extinction if there's enough fires to destroy the air, and then it destroys the trees which make air, because trees create the air. So maybe they're causing the conditions for world destruction. It's like lighting the fuse. That wouldn't be enough to destroy the world. But you light the fuse, and the fuse itself lights the firecracker. And it goes boom, and that starts a fire in the grass, and that spreads and starts a fire in the trees, in the forest, and that spreads, kills all the animals, and it's a chain effect. Just like we talked about with the water. Years ago, they were saying that if the fish die, if this kind of fish dies or that kind of fish died, which is a food for other kind of fish, then they'll die, and it's a chain reaction. So we know that the seas are dying, and the timber and the forest and the habitat is dying. And that itself will be exponential in causing more trouble in the world. If the world really is getting warmer, that will cause it to get warmer and warmer. It will cause it to be less water. It will cause it to be less of what the earth needs to further human life. So perhaps they're literally going to have depopulation by what appears to be natural causes, but will not be natural causes. Now, I can't go through every one of these fires, but Wikipedia has a list of largest fires of the 21st century. Number 1 is Australia in 2023, 150 million hectares. Number 2 surprises me. I didn't even know about the South American wildfires. About 86 million hectares burned. And that's many different countries: Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Venezuela. Number 3, Australia again, 2002 to 2003. They had 54 million hectares. Brazil again in 2024. More Australian bushfires in 2019. Canada 2023. Russia 2021. Siberia 2019. And in 2014, the Northwest Territories of Canada. In 2020, we had California wildfires. In 2010, in Bolivia. In 2006 to 2007 in Australia. So it goes down, British Columbia, Amazon, rainforest wildfires, Chile wildfires. Oh, Australia again, Russia and Greece, and that's, it just keeps going on. Probably that's just the ones that were the worst. What's going on? Anyway, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and let you go tonight, and hope you have a wonderful evening. I know that you will be blessed, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.